The drone holds station at altitude, its thermal sensor sweeping a wide expanse of concrete and grass in the pre-dawn dark. Below, in neat rows along the dispersal aprons, sit shapes that glow faintly in the infrared, the unmistakable silhouettes of military helicopters, rotors folded, fuel loads resting. It is the autumn of 2023, the airfield at Berdyansk, inside Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia region, has been hosting these machines for months. From here, Russian Army aviation has operated with remarkable impunity, sitting just outside the reach of every rocket Ukraine has been able to fire. The pilots and ground crews have grown accustomed to that safety. Tonight, the geometry of the war is about to change. This is the story of Operation Dragonfly. It is the story of a weapon held back for months and then released at exactly the right moment against exactly the right target. It is the story of what happens when the map of safe distances is redrawn overnight, and of why one salvo on a single autumn night forced a restructuring of Russian Army aviation that no amount of frontline air defense could have accomplished. To understand why that night matters, we need to begin with a number: 80 kilometers. 80 kilometers is the effective range of the M30 and M31 GMLRS rockets that Ukraine received with its first HIMARS launchers in the summer of 2022. That number defined a very specific boundary. Anything inside 80 kilometers was reachable with precision. Anything outside was not. The Russians understood this immediately and pushed their ammunition depots, command posts, fuel hubs, and aviation assets progressively further from the front. If a target was at 90 kilometers, at 100, at 110, Ukraine's rockets simply could not touch it. Russian Army aviation exploited this margin consistently. Attack helicopters, the Kar-52 Alligator, the Mi-28 Night Hunter, the Mi-24 and Mi-35 Hind variants, operated from airfields parked comfortably beyond the 80-kilometer ring. From Berdyansk and from the airfield at Luhansk, they flew sorties against Ukrainian ground forces, using anti-tank guided missiles and rockets against armor and infantry. Commercial satellite imagery captured before the October 2023 strike had already shown more than 20 helicopters based at Berdyansk alone. According to Defense Express, these aircraft sat on open aprons because their operators calculated, correctly, that no Ukrainian weapon could reach them. The summer 2023 counteroffensive made the helicopter threat viscerally clear. Ukrainian armored columns probing Russian defensive belts were struck from the air repeatedly. The helicopters flew with something close to confidence because confidence was warranted. They were operating from a sanctuary, and everyone on both sides understood it. What happened next is one of the cleaner examples of how covert weapons delivery can generate decisive operational surprise. The United States had been considering the transfer of ATACMS, the Army Tactical Missile System, for months. Ukrainian officials had lobbied repeatedly for the weapon. The negotiations were tracked in public. Every Ukrainian request was reported. Every American deferral was also reported. When the Biden administration finally agreed to send a tranche of missiles, they did something deliberate. They kept it entirely quiet. No announcement, no press briefing, no background guidance. The delivery happened in secret, and the first confirmation that Ukraine possessed ATACMS would not come from Washington. It would come from the wreckage on 2 Russian airfields in occupied territory. The variant transferred in that initial covert batch was the M39, designated Block 1 in the ATACMS family. As analysed by FDD's Long War Journal, the M39 carries approximately 950 M74 submunitions, nearly 1,000 small anti-personnel and anti-material bomblets scattered across an area target rather than detonated in a single concentrated explosion. The Long War Journal noted explicitly that the M39 is ineffective against bridges and hardened command posts. Reinforced concrete does not care much about small bomblets. Fueled aircraft, thin-skinned vehicles and parked helicopters are a different matter entirely. A shower of roughly 1,000 bomblets landing across a helicopter dispersal apron is, from an engineering standpoint, a near worst-case scenario for the aircraft sitting there. The M39's range is 165 kilometers. That number transforms the picture entirely when set against the 80-kilometer ceiling of GMLRS. The gap between 80 and 165 kilometers had been, for more than a year, Russian sanctuary space. Ammunition depots lived there. Command nodes lived there. Helicopter bases lived there. ATACMS did not simply extend the threat by a fixed increment, it erased the sanctuary. Everything in the 80 to 165 kilometer band from a HIMARS launcher was now reachable. The math of safe basing had been rewritten. One additional detail about the initial delivery is worth noting with the appropriate caveats. According to reporting by the New York Times, sourced to 2 Western officials and cited by the Long War Journal, the initial covert tranche consisted of reportedly around 20 missiles. That figure comes from anonymous sourcing and should be understood as an estimate. Around 20 missiles is a carefully rationed opening salvo. The choice of target for that salvo reveals the thinking. You do not spend your first 20 ATACMS on infrastructure that resists bomblets. You spend them where a submunition shower does maximum damage to maximum concentrations of high-value, thin-skinned assets. You spend them on helicopter bases. In the early hours of the 17th of October 2023, Ukraine's Special Operations Forces initiated Operation Dragonfly. The operation, as described by Defense Express citing the SOF's own statement, was carried out jointly with other elements of Ukraine's armed forces. ATACMS missiles struck 2 targets, the airfield at Berdyansk in occupied Zaporizhzhia and the airfield at Luhansk. Both were forward helicopter bases in the former sanctuary zone. Ukrainian Special Operations Forces reported that the strikes caused secondary detonations, ammunition and fuel igniting, that continued at Berdyansk until approximately 4 o'clock in the morning and at Luhansk until approximately 11 o'clock the following day, according to Defense Express. Those timelines, from Ukrainian official sources, indicate substantial secondary effects: fuel burning, munitions initiating, the contents of an active military airfield continuing to combust through the night and into the next morning. Russia offered no competing account and no acknowledgement of the losses. The verification trail for this strike is unusually robust, and walking through its separate elements illustrates how OSINT methodology works in practice. The first and most direct anchor was physical evidence. In the days after the strike, photographs emerged from Berdyansk showing an ATACMS rocket motor in the wreckage. Defense Express published an analysis under the headline, "ATACMS it was. New photos show the missile engine found on ruins of Russian airbase in Berdyansk." An ATACMS motor has a specific form factor, specific dimensions, and specific characteristics. Finding one lying in the rubble of a Russian airfield on the 18th of October 2023 is confirmation of weapon type in the most unambiguous possible sense. You do not need intercepts or satellite analysis when the engine of the weapon is in the debris. The second anchor was the damage pattern. Newsweek published a detailed photo analysis of the characteristic signature of M74 submunition impacts. Under the headline, "Photos reveal devastating impact of ATACMS bomblets on Russian helicopters." The analysis described the pattern, not a single large crater, but dozens of small impacts spread across an area consistent with a bomblet shower. Parked helicopters showed multiple small penetrations and fires at various points across their airframes, exactly what roughly 1,000 submunitions scattering across a dispersal area would produce. The damage signature matched the weapon's known warhead configuration. The third anchor was commercial satellite imagery. After the strike, Earth observation companies released imagery of Berdyansk airfield. The Kyiv Post published photographs under the headline "Aftermath of Ukraine's devastating ATACMS strike on Berdyansk airfield," revealed in satellite photos showing burned-out helicopter remains and scorch marks at the dispersal pads. Analysts could compare these images against the baseline established by prior satellite coverage, showing more than 20 helicopters at Berdyansk. The before and after comparison provided a framework for estimating the scale of damage, though the exact count from imagery varies by analyst depending on the resolution available. The fourth anchor, and the key independent assessment, was the UK Ministry of Defence intelligence update published on the 20th of October 2023, 3 days after the strike. The MOD assessment, cited by Newsweek, stated that although the full extent of damage was currently unconfirmed, it was likely that 9 Russian military helicopters had been destroyed at Berdyansk and 5 at Luhansk, for a total of 14. That language is worth preserving precisely. The UK MOD did not say 14 destroyed was confirmed. It said 14 was the likely assessment, with damage still unconfirmed. Carrying that qualification is not pedantry, it is the accurate reading of what the source actually said. Against that UK assessment sits a different figure from Ukrainian sources. According to analysis published by RBC Ukraine, Ukrainian military analysts calculated 9 helicopters destroyed and 15 damaged. That is a meaningfully different breakdown from the UK MOD figure. The UK focused on probable destroyed airframes. The Ukrainian count added a substantial number of damaged but potentially repairable aircraft. These two figures are not fundamentally in conflict. They reflect different scopes and levels of confidence, but they should not be collapsed into a single authoritative number, because no such authoritative number exists in the public record. Russia published nothing. Putin addressed ATACMS in general terms, stating the missiles could not drastically change the situation along the line of contact, while conceding they pose a threat, according to Newsweek. That formulation provides no useful data on actual losses. The honest rendering of the loss picture is therefore, UK intelligence assessed that 14 helicopters were likely destroyed, 9 at Berdyansk, 5 at Luhansk, in an assessment the Modi itself explicitly qualified as unconfirmed. Ukraine's count put 9 destroyed and more damaged. Russia acknowledged nothing. The reliable conclusion is that significant rotary wing losses occurred, supported by the convergence of physical, photographic, satellite, and governmental evidence. The precise count should carry the qualifications its sources attached to it. What helicopter types were on those aprons? Ukrainian sources listed possibilities: the Ka-52, the Mi-28, the Mi-24 and Mi-35 variants, and the Mi-8 and Mi-17 transport types, according to Defense Express. What the available sourcing did not provide was a confirmed type-by-type breakdown of what was destroyed. The sources listed what might have been present, not a verified manifest of losses. Attributing a specific number of Ka-52s destroyed, for instance, would require confirmed visual identification of destroyed Ka-52 airframes, and that level of granular confirmation is not in the public record for this strike. Ukraine's SUF statement also claimed destruction of 1 air defense launcher. Sources suggested the type was a Panzer, though the type designation was unconfirmed, along with an ammunition warehouse and what was described as special equipment, plus runway damage. These claims come from Ukrainian official sources and carry that caveat. Now step back from the immediate tactical picture and consider what the range mathematics mean in the context of how this conflict had evolved to that point. When HIMARS arrived in June 2022, Ukraine gained the ability to reach 80 kilometers with precision. Russia responded by pushing its logistics and aviation beyond that ring. The cycle was straightforward. Ukraine gains a new range, Russia retreats to a new safe distance, Russia operates from that distance until Ukraine gains yet more range. ATACMS at 165 kilometers doubled the depth of Ukraine's precision strike threat in a single delivery. Every asset that had relocated to the 80 to 165 kilometer band was now inside the new threat envelope. But the operational effect of the 17th of October strike extended beyond the aircraft destroyed or damaged on those aprons. Ukrainian officials and analysts, as reported by NV, described the compulsion on Russian aviation to relocate and disperse as a significant achievement independent of the destroyed airframes. An aircraft forced to operate from a base 60 kilometers farther from the front has a fraction of the useful loiter time over target per sortie that it would have at a closer base. The density and responsiveness of helicopter fire support degrades as the basing distance grows, regardless of whether specific aircraft have been hit. It is worth noting that the extent and duration of Russian aviation relocation after the 17th of October was not independently quantified in available public reporting. The assessment that dispersal constituted a significant operational gain reflects Ukrainian and analyst interpretation, rather than a measured outcome. The secrecy of the delivery is worth examining as its own tactical phenomenon. Russia's intelligence services presumably had some awareness that ATACMS transfer was under discussion. The negotiations had been publicly reported. What they did not know, because no announcement had been made, was that the transfer had actually occurred. There was no public signal that the threat level had changed. Airfield commanders at Berdyansk and Luhansk had no formal reason to conclude that the situation was different on the night of the 16th of October than it had been the night before. The first indication that the calculation had changed came from the missiles themselves. This is a distinct operational posture from announcing a capability transfer and giving an adversary time to adapt. The pattern of covert delivery followed by immediate first use maximized disorientation on the receiving end. Kyiv Post's coverage under the headlines "Secretly deployed ATACMS used in devastating Ukrainian strike on Russian airfield" captured this double revelation. The secret and its consequence arrived as a single event. The technical match between the M39's warhead and the target type is worth isolating, because it illuminates why the target selection was so effective. When a single M39 detonates above a helicopter dispersal pad, it is not creating one large explosion. It is seeding an area roughly the size of several football fields with nearly 1,000 small impacts. A helicopter in that zone does not need a direct hit from a large warhead to be rendered unserviceable. A fueling system punctured, a rotor head damaged, an avionics bay breached. Any of these can be achieved by a submunition that would leave hardened concrete untouched. The geometry of the warhead matches the geometry of the target. Distributed aircraft require a distributed threat. The Long War Journal's characterization of the M39 as effective against soft area targets rather than hardened infrastructure is not a limitation. It is a description of the weapon's designed purpose, and the choice of the M39 for the first ATACMS employment reflected an accurate understanding of that design intent. The no acknowledgement posture from Russia on the losses is itself informative, not because silence proves a particular number, but because the pattern of Russian official communications around significant losses is consistent across the conflict. Deny or redirect, attribute to gestures of goodwill, or simply stay silent. The absence of a Russian counter-narrative does not confirm the Ukrainian figures or the UK mode assessment. It is simply the absence of a competing account from the party that would have the most direct knowledge of its own losses and the least incentive to publicize them honestly. There is one dimension of the aftermath that the available evidence cannot fully resolve, and honest analysis should acknowledge it. How many of the damaged helicopters at Berdyansk and Luhansk were subsequently recovered, repaired, and returned to service? The UK mod assessment focused on likely destroyed airframes. Ukraine's count of 15 damaged implies a category of aircraft that were struck but potentially repairable. Russian maintenance infrastructure in occupied territory was substantial. It would be speculative to assume that every damaged airframe was a permanent loss. The downstream fate of the damaged aircraft is not documented in the available open record, and any assertion about permanent fleet reduction based solely on this strike requires that caveat. What is not speculative is the broader pattern. In 2022, Russia believed its ammunition depots were safe beyond 80 kilometers. HIMARS demonstrated that belief was wrong. In 2023, Russia believed its helicopter bases were safe beyond 80 kilometers. ATACMS demonstrated that belief was wrong. The consistency of the pattern across both episodes is more analytically significant than either episode in isolation. Each Western precision strike system transfer did not simply add a capability, it invalidated an existing Russian calculation about what was safe and where safety required retreating to next. That recursive cycle, safe zone established, safe zone invalidated, new safe zone established farther back, runs through the entire arc of this conflict's precision strike evolution. HIMARS moved Russian logistics. ATACMS moved Russian aviation. Each system rewrote the map of what was reachable, imposing operational costs on the adversary that extended well beyond the physical damage from any single strike. The helicopters at Berdyansk had rested in their sanctuary because the 80-kilometer boundary said they could. After the 17th of October 2023, No such boundary reliably existed in the 80 to 165 kilometer band. That single change in the geometry carries consequences that outlast the specific events of one night. The ATACMS motor found in the rubble the morning after Operation Dragonfly was not just evidence of what had happened. It was a marker, a physical artifact of the moment when the precision strike envelope expanded, when the old calculation about safe distance was superseded, and when the helicopters that had spent months operating from their sanctuary had to begin thinking differently about where they could park.